An addict.
Hello, Robert.
I'll start at the beginning. I was born 8 weeks premature and had 13 blood transfusions. So I was born rhesus negative. And I think a lot of the stuff, a lot of the values I picked up in the womb, which were to survive, I must not tell my truth, and various other sort of anxieties and stuff. And about age 3, I had visitors in my bedroom, and because I'd wait for my mum to come and say goodnight, and she'd be on the phone to her mates, getting pissed, and her drugs were things like sleeping pills, Purple Hearts, not sure, lots of different prescription drugs, including codeine, sulfadine. She used to have those big boxes of sulfadine. And of course, from that, like for being on heroin, she had stomach problems and had half a pancreas cut out. And then later in life, she had what they call an upper body hemorrhage, and went into a coma. And so I grew up in an addictive family. My eldest sibling had either motor neurons disease or alcoholic neuropathy, which is where you get muscle wastage. Eventually, his throat wouldn't work. And he died about 30 years premature. And obviously later in life I worked out that the 3 visitors were probably my siblings because my parents were asleep. And that went on till 5, and that progressed. It got worse over those 2 years. And I was very sort of full of beans. You know, my joy de vivre was sort of removed from me. So I used to bounce out of bed in the morning, and when I was being put to bed, I'd say, you know, what are we doing tomorrow? And that all went. And I felt very sluggish in the morning, and didn't really want to face them at breakfast and that sort of thing. And that, thank God, has come back. And but anyway, that trauma left me with learning disabilities. I wasn't able to connect to the teachers. And in recovery, I met someone who'd studied in the university about abuse, and they said, well, this professor came in and he did a slideshow, and he showed children who'd been neglected, and there was a black bit in the front of the brain, which was basically just a void. So the frontal lobe hadn't developed, just the back bit, which is the survival bit. And I know certainly that many people who are in prisons are there for learning disabilities. And my experience was that after the abuse, because it got worse, I complained about it more. And my mother got me a nightlight, and then it stopped, because obviously they would be seen coming into my room. And then it went off between my sister and brother after that, so she'd go up to their landing. And funny enough, I felt quite alone with that. And although now I realise, you know, I've got some compassion for her, and she does this sort of works with prisoners, with a film charity, and I've done quite a bit to, you know, of trying to do sort of good works, affordable housing and stuff. And I realise that it's me trying to unburden the unearned guilt. You know, so I felt guilty for what had happened to me, and I couldn't connect to teachers, and so I got a lot of bad marks and was beaten a lot at school. So my marks were very low, and I got a lot of sort of what were called. I got 9 in my quarterlies, which was a very low score, and 13 stripes. And if you got more than 2, you had to go and see the headmaster, and obviously 4 onwards, you were getting caned. So I sort of believed that I was a bad person and that what happened to me was my fault, and so I acted that out. I took on the role of a scapegoat, and it's like sort of an actor being stuck in role play. I was acting as if I was bad. Of course I wasn't bad, I was born a good person. And so there was a lot of sort of, I felt the dis-ease of addiction. So I felt ill at ease, and when I was at school for sort of, from 3 onwards I was fighting, scrapping, because I got quite sort of high from the adrenaline from scrapping. And then age 7 I was rummaging around in the larder looking for booze, mainly cooking alcohols. And age 10 I started getting drunk, and age 16 I discovered drugs, other types of drugs, and then there was a lot of arguments at home about money. So I thought, well, money will fix the problem. So I went into the city and got onto cocaine, and made a lot of money and did a lot of cocaine basically, and did that for a number of years, and then I joined quite a respectable firm and came off coke for about 8 years, about 8 years, but was doing other drugs. And then I was at a party and people were trying to get it together to go and score, and I thought, this is ridiculous, just get in the car, I'm driving. And we got to the guy's house, and I was the first out the door because obviously I wanted to get it before it ran out. And they said, you can't go in there, that shotgun is Sean's house. I said, I don't care whose house it is, I'm getting it before it runs out. And I was in there, and I got the first packet, and I just opened the ears of the packet, if you like, and crunched it like that and did it in one. Did the same thing with the second packet, did that in one. Was doing the third one, and the dealer's girlfriend looked at me with the sort of expression of, how are we going to get rid of the body? Because it was obviously I was going over. And I put the ears back in and flicked it across to her as if I was being selfish, like, you have some, so I'm hogging it all, sort of thing. And that gave me the idea of the progression of the illness, because before I would only do a 1/4 gram line, and that used to hit me pretty hard. And I'd just done 2 grams straight out of the packet. So I was doing 8 times the amount, having been off it for 8 years. So I'm pretty convinced that if I picked up now, it would kill me, because my brain says you can have so much, and my body is like, we just ain't, we can't do it anymore. And anyway, so I was back on the coke with a vengeance, and was buying it in a very pure quality from London, and spending a lot of money on it, and I ended up in Plaistow, Nick, and they said, we're going to hold you on remand because you'll risk yourself and others, and this is the second time you've been in here in a month, both for drink driving, both for possession. And I thought, well, I really want to get the other side of these bars. And the sergeant said that there'd been a witch hunt in the police force. He'd nearly gone to prison himself, and he looked at his health, and maybe I should do the same thing. And I said, well, what does that involve? And he said, well, maybe you should start going down the gym and stuff. And I thought, all right, yeah, I can do that. And anything to get the other side of these bars, because I only had 15 cigarettes left. And I thought being on remand meant I was going to be stuck in the police station. I didn't know that there were remand prisons. And I said, well, can I make a call? And, to a lawyer, and he said yes. So I picked up the phone and I made 2 calls to 2 different lawyers in case the first one didn't come. And I said to the solicitor when she came, I can't, she said, they're going to put you on hold on remand because they haven't got a local address. And I said, well, I have got a local address, but I can't give the details because my landlord's on the run. And she said, oh, well, we can get round that without giving his details away. And so I said, all right, whatever, as long as you get me out. And she got me out, and then I had to go to court. And I said, oh, tell the magistrates I'll go to rehab. And she said, I think they're going to bang you up anyway, Robert. And I had no intention of going to rehab, it was just a sort of swerve. And so I thought, wow, this is bad, I'm going to have to go to rehab. And on the slim chance that I might, they might let me go to rehab sort of thing, I might not have any choices left. And this journalist said, magistrates like seeing people being rehabilitated, why don't you go and see a doctor? And halfway through this meal, he stopped drinking. And I thought, how do you do that? And I was amazed. I was still ordering, and he was just saying, he just stopped. And I went to my doctor, and he said, go and see this guy who was very worried about how much we were drinking 2 years ago. maybe you could drink normally. And I thought, well, yeah, this sounds good. And I've always wanted to be able to do that. And because, you know, I'd go to a party and if there was plenty of booze, I'd go, fall over factor 50, which means I was going to fall over 50 times before I was going to leave. And I'd be dancing and I'd be saying to myself, what idiot put the dance floor on a slope? You know, why not put it on a flatbed of the garden? And of course there was no slope at all, it's just I was gone, you know. And there were times when we were at this party in the woods and I was falling backwards into the fire and these people jumped up and grabbed me. There was another time I was falling backwards over a banister onto a stone floor and this guy grabbed me by the feet. And I said, oh, thanks a lot. And I turned round, took about 8 paces and fell straight through his glass coffee table. And fell through another one abroad and, you know, drove a car into a tree when I was 14 and another one off the straight doing about 80 miles an hour after a wedding and into the ditch. And just my stepmom was full of hideous accidents. And I just thought, how have I survived all this stuff? And you know, how incapacitating drugs are for me. And anyway, I went into rehab, and I went to court for the possession for the code. And I said to the magistrate, to the stipe, I want to be sentenced for everything in one go, because I've got other charges. And she said, okay. But in between time, the prosecution were reading out 3 pages of stuff, and they were going 7 charges of burglary, criminal damage when I was 17, and I went, you know, alcohol related, and then other stuff, you know, I go drug related, more stuff, you know, he just on and on and on he was going on, and I was just going drug related, alcohol related, it was like doing a step 1 in court. And then she made the order and said, I'm going to order that you stay in rehab for the next 3 months, and then we're going to sentence you for the whole lot in one go. And I remember coming out and thinking, well, she didn't say which rehab, but I thought, for once in life, Robert, you know, you've been given a second chance, grab it, stay in the rehab, whatever happens, just stay there, don't use, you know, just follow the suggestions, just start listening. And so I did. And this woman said to me in a one-to-one, she said, you know, who have you made friends with since you've been here? And I was like, well, I haven't really. I didn't want to give away any details. I didn't want it to be on me, you know. And she said, how do you think you've changed since you've been here? And I said, well, I don't think I have. And she said, I was still very defensive. And she said, I think you've been conning people all your life, Robert. And I thought, ooh, that's a bit rich. But I didn't say anything. I think I'm going to stop talking now. And she said, you need to go and see Ed, because cannabis is the most dangerous of all the drugs. And I thought, oh, she's off her head. Doesn't know what she's talking about. She's obviously not a recovering addict. You know, she's not like the other counsellors. She's in la-la land. And especially after what she said about being dishonest. And so afterwards I came out, I went into the kitchen, I opened the fridge, I thought, this place is useless. They've run out of butter. And it's a failed bed and breakfast in a failed drive-through town. What I've done. And I got this muffin out. And I thought, well, I'll put some cream on the muffin, and the muffin's stale. And this old biddy came out of the office and went, oh, you're not allowed to eat between meals? I went, oh, no problem, I'll put it in the bin. So I turned my back on her to walk towards the bin, stuffed half of it in my mouth, the cream went down my front. I threw the other half in the bin and went outside to have a cigarette. And this guy, Charlie, who'd become quite a close friend, said, you seem really angry, Robert. And I went, this blah, 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 told me that I'm dodgy. And or dishonest or whatever. And he said, well, it does help if you get honest. And I thought, oh no, well, maybe she's right. And about 3 days later, after I calmed down a bit, I thought, right, well, what does get honest mean, you know? And I thought, well, what's the 10 Commandments? And I remember, you know, you're not allowed to murder people, no adultery, you're not allowed to steal, and I couldn't remember the rest. And I thought, well, I can cut those 3 things out without any great hardship. And I can probably do the rest of them. And a sense of calm came over me. My mind was like a committee up there. And other people could watch television, I couldn't watch television. And I got a sense of calm having made that decision. And I went to court, and I rang my mate on the way to court, and And I think that was the time I went to court to see the stipe. And I rang my sister and went, oh, by the way, that thing we were doing, we don't want to do it anymore. He said, I'll close the file. I thought, oh, that was easy. And I spoke to a mate of mine, and that's the time I had to go to court for the stipe. And then I did a step 5 in rehab, and I had to read the resentment I had about the guy that I was doing the step 5 with, who was the counsellor. I remember saying to this woman, can I put this in? She said, well, is it a resentment? I went, yes, but I'm going to have to read it out to the guy I've got the resentment with. She said, it doesn't matter, just put it in. And I read that bit out, and it wasn't a problem. And then it came to sort of experimenting with sex at school. And he said, well, that's quite normal. You know, if you have kids, you can tell them that's quite normal, and there's no need to be very hang up about it. And then there was some, you know, some of the incest stuff came up, and he said, well, that's, you know, because I can remember my sister going up the stairs, and I couldn't really remember the stuff about me. I thought there were ghosts in my bedroom. And he said, well, that's quite normal. Incest is very common in addictive families. Your eldest brother and you turn to drugs, and your sister and brother turn to each other. And then I went off to court to be sentenced. And the stipe was, his face was like a red traffic light. He was just going mad, because the sister said it wasn't her intention to tie your hands behind your back while making the order that I stayed in rehab for another 3 months. But the effect of it was that he couldn't send me to prison, and he was so angry. I thought I was going to wet myself. I thought he was going to break the rules anyway. And I was terrified. And I'd just done my step 5, so I was feeling really sort of open and vulnerable. And I came out, and the 2 bailiffs grabbed me to take me down to the cells. And these 2 other guys came through the swing doors and went, no, he's coming with us, and showed them this clipboard. And they said, no, this bloke bangs everybody up. We're taking him down. And they went, no, he's got probation. I was in tears. It was such a relief that I wasn't going to go to prison. And the pre-sentencing report recommended me for a custodial sentence, and I couldn't understand that. I thought, well, I'm clean. You know, I'm doing everything I'm going to be doing. Why do I have to go to prison? But I think that was exactly what I needed. I needed to be focused on the programme. And I came out, and we'd been to the London Convention, and we were told to get sponsors, and I'd asked this guy to be my sponsor. So I rang him when I got out, and he gave me a list of things to do, which were at the back of the receipt for lunch, and it was, don't use, pray first thing, ring him, get to a meeting, find a home group, get a commitment to the home group, read some literature, speak to someone new. And so I thought, I can do that. And then he said, no work for the first year. And I was like, well, you know, I'm not going to be able to pay the rent, blah, 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 blah. He said, have you got a roof over your head tonight? I went, yes. He said, have you got enough money for food this evening? I went, yes. He said, all right, call me tomorrow morning. I went, okay. And that just went on like that. And after the first year, he said, all right, now make 40 hours a week available for work, and things will start to happen. And before long, I had more on my plate than I could deal with. And in recovery, before, when I was using, I was doing very addictive stuff to do with sort of politicians and sort of government stuff abroad, and it was all very exciting. And the guy who was in rehab, his father, who was a businessman, said to me, you ought to do stuff differently in recovery, because if you do the same stuff you were doing before, you probably aren't going to make it. You know, you've got to change what you do. So I started doing property, and in the process of doing that, I discovered my brothers had stolen stuff I was due to inherit. And but by doing business and working with banks and various other people, I managed to buy the stuff I should have inherited, and found out more about what had gone on. And in fact, the more I bought, the more evidence I found. And last week, I sent off a report to the police with all the evidence. And God willing, I will get it back. So my sponsor said to me, as part of my step 9, you've got to get the property and the money back. As part of my amends to myself, he said, don't worry about the abuse, they probably can't remember it. And people certainly disassociate. And what do? They split. So you have like a split personality or personality disorders. And if my brother had, schizophrenia in his early teens, he could have easily forgotten. But I don't think he has forgotten, because I said to him, you know, my sister went up to see you every night for about 40 minutes to an hour, and there was just total silence on the other end of the phone. So I think, you know, there certainly was no rebuttal. And when I said to him, you and the other brother shafted me, he said, oh, we didn't shaft you. And I was talking about the property, not about other stuff. So I thought, oh, it's very defensive. And anyway, I'm very grateful that I'm in recovery. I'm very grateful that I've re-felt the pain and grieved the loss of the fantasy of the ideal family, because I created the fantasy that, you know, it was a lovely family and all this sort of stuff, and of course it wasn't. It was very uncomfortable being in that situation. And hence I turned to drugs, and drugs worked very well for me for about 10 years, 11 years. You know, I had quite a good time. Certainly had, you know, good parties and stuff, and there was a lot of injuries, but a lot of the time it was quite fun, and I quite enjoyed the lifestyle, because I thought that was what people did, you know. I thought this was being successful. But the last 6 years were hellish, and I couldn't stop, and the drugs had stopped working. And so when I found recovery, I was very grateful. And I'm grateful to have processed the anger, because, you know, it was a big impact on my self-esteem about 10 years into recovery, about what happened in my childhood, you know, from my siblings. I thought, oh, God, who would want that, you know? And then I realized, then I was going through all the evidence of the theft, and I was quite angry about that. And so I was quite sort of homicidal about that for a long time. And that's now passed. And what I've realized is that suffering is character building. And I'm grateful to be the other side of that. And that it's better to be the survivor than it is the perpetrator, because the perpetrators really hate themselves in a huge way. And so I'm actually grateful to be where I am now and not where they are. And so I've got a sort of degree of grace around it now. And I've done a lot in recovery. I've done a lot of traveling. I've been to 20 or 30 countries. I've done all sorts of things, from mining. I've done the property stuff. I've got over 20 planning permissions outside of development boundary, which is, you know, it's supposed to be incredibly difficult. And done quite a bit of construction. And of course I've met people in recovery all over the world. I do Skype meetings that are online. And you know, I've listened to stuff by different doctors on things like YouTube who explain, you know, that in most cases there's been some trauma, and that the trauma triggers the addiction gene because the chromosomes express themselves differently. But one of the doctors says that if I can focus on what I'm passionate about, because I spend most of my time working, and start being authentic in my work, then my brain will regrow to assist me in the process, and my DNA will change, and then I'll stop attracting my mother. So it's like a suggestion. I always dreaded marrying my mother, because I thought, you know, this would just be worse than hell. And so, you know, there is hope. And I've got a relationship with a higher power. I listen for that small voice within. I'd love to go through the steps, but we haven't got time. And I think really the sort of spiritual side of it, you know, being able to talk to people on a meaningful basis, people in recovery, is a gift beyond words. If I've got something I can't solve myself, I talk to another recovering addict about it, and somehow, miraculously, an answer comes. And my sponsor says that when two addicts are talking together, they're praying. So, without going too far out there with that stuff, you know, that has been the biggest gift. And learning that someone suggested writing a joy list. There are 90 different things that give me joy, from nature, trees, architecture, design, interior design, fabrics, people, cultures, spiritual stuff, scriptures, food. I mean, it goes on and on. And so my whole focus was on getting drugs. I was missing out so much. There's such a wealth to life, that most of which is free. And so I've got a much richer life in recovery, because each day I can sort of engage with different things that I'm passionate about. And rather than sort of, the last 6 years of my using, the curtains were drawn, there were big anchor chains on the gates. I was living at night. I was going to bed at 5:30 in the morning before the birds start tweeting and the bailiffs start banging on the door. I didn't want to really be alive. I didn't want to face, I just wanted to sleep and use. And now there's things I care about, and I've worked with people on stuff for 17, 18 years, and it looks like finally on one of our bigger projects we're going to pull off this project with the people we were trying to work with 17 years ago. And other people, will come in and offer us alternative deals. But I said to someone last week, I said, look, I'd rather do the deal with the people we've been working with for 17 years, because there's a relationship there. I'd rather finish what we started. And that's what I find happens in recovery. I'm able to finish what I start. I'm able to put one foot in front of the other and just keep going. And what seems like a wall can either be gone round or climbed over. That I can just keep. And when I do that, despite my fears, sometimes I pray and go, I'm in fear, and I get back good, because I'm building my faith muscles. And it's coming to meetings and hearing other people sharing that gives me hope, because I come here with a problem, and either I share about it and the solution comes, or I hear someone else share and I go, that's what I need to do. It's just for today. I only need to do today's work. And most of my stuff is projected fear, awfulizing. And I've been in so many meetings sharing about stuff going, I've got a problem with this. And I think, well, sometimes I write a victory list. There's so many things that have been achieved in recovery, and all those things I've had in meetings going, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that. I get that done, and there's something else to worry about. Anyway, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Nice one, Rob.